OSU Library, and I've been coordinating Science Cafe for 5 years now. I would like to thank our library ambassadors who have been here helping us tonight. Looks like we have a few more people. Come on in, help yourself to refreshments, have a seat. And their advisor is Dr. Marshall Fulgham. This Science Cafe is sponsored by the OSU Library, OSU Vice President for Research, Dr. Kenneth Sewell, who is with us tonight. Thank you for coming, Dr. Sewell. And the OSU chapter of Sigma Xi Scientific Research Society, and Dr. Udiah Da Silva is here tonight, and he is president of Sigma Xi. Refreshments are courtesy of the Vice President for Research and Friends of the OSU Library. Okay, we always get a lot of student organizations to partner with us for Science Cafe, so I will recognize these groups at this time. If you are in any of these groups, just raise your hand when I call the name so we can see who might have shown up. We have the OSU student chapter of, actually, let me get to my slide. Okay, the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, ASIS. Anybody here from ASIS? Alrighty, how about American Society of Manufacturing Engineers Technology? College of Engineering, Architecture, and Technology Student Council. Net Impact OSU. OSU Sierra Club. There we go, all right, yay. Society for Environmental Scientists Graduate Student Organization. And Tau Beta Pi Honor Society. Okay. So our program format for Science Cafe, we start with trivia questions and prizes. We will move into our Science Cafe presentation. We'll have time for Q&A. And then we'll have a closing with evaluation forms, announcements, and door prizes. Trivia question 1. What government agency regulates drinking water? Let's get the students to answer. Any student want to guess? Yes. That is one of them. So I will go ahead and count that. Here's the answer, and I'll get your prize. Okay, trivia question 2. Anybody want to guess? Yes, that's correct. I wonder if this has changed since 2005. I couldn't find any more updated statistics on that. Okay. I'm going to introduce you. Our speaker for tonight's program is Dr. Kalkan, who is with the Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering Department. He earned his MS degree in mechanical engineering and his PhD degree in engineering science, both at Penn State University. He came to OSU in 2006. He's the inventor of, I saw 13 U.S. patents? 13 U.S. patents, which have been licensed by companies such as LG Philips, Bowser's, Solarity, and Nano Horizons. His areas of interest are nanostructured materials, nano devices, and nanosensors, bottom-up nanofabrication via plasma solution chemistry, single molecule detection and imaging, and biomedical monitoring. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Dr. Kalkan.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here. being your guest speaker for Science Cafe. I really appreciate the efforts of the organizers putting this event together. Now, I have to tell you, by the end of this talk, I'm hoping two things come true. One is I hope I will survive because it was a long day and I had to teach 2 lectures. The second thing I hope is you just take home some message or some information, some piece of knowledge. Okay, so let me start here. And my hands are actually sweaty, so I can't navigate very well here. But once I start this, okay, this is a touch screen, I guess. Ooh. Okay, finally I got it. It's a hot day, right? And I'm a little sweating here, so these touchpads don't work with sweaty fingers. Okay, now. Question for you. After Karen's question, this is your next quiz question. Which island is this? I think somebody said Hawaii. Anybody from Hawaii here? Okay, so this island is, the big island of state of Hawaii. It's also called Hawaii. Lots of interesting things on this island. The home of Kona coffee here, the tallest waterfalls, Hilave and Kilauea. This is the most active volcano in the world. Mauna Loa. This means long mountain. If you go to Walmart, it's also actually a brand of macadamia nuts. And Mauna Kea, that means the White Mountain. Actually, I was there last summer. Some of the finest telescopes, space telescopes, are actually on the top of that mountain. That's also the highest point in the state of Hawaii. And this person looks like one of the geek scientists working in there, but she's only my wife, okay? Okay, so now there's also one more interesting thing on this island, which actually I pointed here with red. That's Kamilo Beach, and it's a sacred beach because ancient Hawaiians used to go there to search for their missing people in the sea, like missing fishermen, missing sailors. That's because we understand it today. If you look at the ocean currents, if somebody's lost here, probably months later or years later, he or she will come back there, okay? These are basically the North Pacific gyres, but altogether these 3 gyres are actually considered to be a single gyre. There is one in the South Pacific. There are 2 of these in the Atlantic Ocean and 1 in the Indian Ocean. Now, today though, something interesting is going on at that beach. Instead of dead bodies and stuff, we actually see some artificial sand, plastic sand. Okay, the locals call these white ones mermaid tears. I don't know if mermaids really exist, but you know, and there are actually other ones, like they are not granular, but just flatter. This is real plastic debris here. I think I can navigate with this too, great. So this is, that's actually plastic debris. These are pellets used in the plastic industry. These are actually the ones escaping from ships or factories. So these are actually normally used in injecting, molding your toothbrush or something, okay? But they escape from the ships and factories, and they just go to the beaches like this. Now, pollution like this is happening everywhere, even Norway, in United Kingdom, in India, Philippines. But the funny thing is, none of these here actually belong to Hawaii. These are all coming from, most of this is actually coming from China here in Hawaii. So indeed, some of those debris, plastic debris, is coming together, agglomerating, and making rocks. So we have plastic rocks formation in Hawaii. Now, those gyres in the ocean, actually they accumulate more and more plastics every year. Maybe total of 8 million cubic tons of plastic actually accumulate in these gyres every year. And the largest one is this western rubbish patch. However, this is not necessarily contributed by United States. Actually, these patches exchange rubbish, trash all the time, and most of this rubbish here is actually coming from China today. Now, those patches are deadly zones for animals. Every year, more than 100,000 mammals and 1 million birds, seabirds, they're dying because they are actually eating those plastic debris, or they are getting entangled. Like this whale is actually in the Philippines, though. This photo is from the Philippines, and whales actually think that those plastic are actually plankton or jellyfish. This is a poor seal. I don't know where this was recorded. She or he is just stuck in there, entangled. And this is an albatross, died in Midway Atoll in the middle of the Pacific. And you see it ingested some plastic caps, probably polyethylene, polypropylene there, and just died. Now, these are pretty bad pictures, but this is not the worst of my story I'm going to tell you today. You're going to see more, you're going to see some worse. You are not going to see it, but you will think about it. You will realize plastic pollution is actually worse than just these pictures. So I'm hoping you will have a good sleep tonight, you know, after this. Now, this much pollution actually easy to understand if you look at the numbers. UC Santa Barbara scientists they published a couple of papers in Science and Science Advances in the last couple of years, and they estimated the total amount of plastic we put in the oceans and we put in the landfills in the last in the human history, actually, because plastic consumption started right after the Second World War. So they said, okay, let's take 1950 as our starting point. And they published this in 2017 and 15, so it's pretty close to today. And in that period of time, 8,300 million metric tons of plastics were produced. And plastics are mostly used in packaging industry. Why? Because they are lightweight, they are strong enough for packaging, they can be transparent, and they are durable. So like water bottles, plastic bags. And because of that, I mean, plastics are actually mostly made just to throw away because they are packaging, they are for packaging. And the 6,300 million metric tons of that is actually disposed. So maybe in this amount, there is still the plastic bag your grandma threw away 30 years ago, 40 years ago. It's still there. Like your grandfather threw away something 50 years ago, it's still there actually. Unfortunately, if we look at the statistics again, we recycle only 9% of that waste. And 12% gets incinerated, means it's burnt, but this process is sometimes not friendly because when you burn plastics, you create carbon particles, they pollute the air. But the worst is 79% of our plastic waste is going to the oceans and landfills. Now, this is also from the same group. 8 million metric tons of plastics are thrown away to the oceans every year. These numbers maybe doesn't mean much, but I can tell you this. that number means you put that trash in grocery store trash bags, okay? And after putting them all in bags, you line up these bags along the coastline of the whole world, around all these coastline. And you go around how many times? 5 times. Actually, one colleague of mine emailed me Sunday, and he made a statistics, and he said in 2006 only, if you put the water bottles next to each other, just produced in 2006, they go to the moon 10 times and come back, go and back 10 times. So we are producing a lot of plastics, and most of it is actually going out. Interestingly, this map shows China is the leading country, but interestingly, Philippines and Indonesia are the second and third here, because these are actual island nations, so they are throwing pretty much all of their garbage to the ocean. Now, how long until it's gone? Is it really gone? I mean, typically people believe a plastic bottle lasts 450 years. But most Australian people believe they actually last up to 1,000 years. So we still don't know how long they actually last, because the fact that these disappear doesn't mean they are really disappearing. Plastic don't really decompose, they just get smaller and smaller. So you may say, hey, I'm living in Oklahoma. I'm not eating fish, so plastic will never come to me. But when they get smaller and smaller, they make these microplastics, and they can even get suspended in the air. People find microplastics in the Arctic ice. It's in your tap water, actually, because northeast of Stillwater, there is a landfill there, and plastic bottles go there too. And by time, that mixes to your drinking water. It takes time, but it happens. We don't know yet how badly this plastic debris is affecting human health, and it's a big area, needs research today, but this is what we know. All the plastics maybe don't poison you directly. The structure of plastics these are polymers. They are like spongy materials. So they are sucking all the lead, all the heavy metals like mercury, lead, chromium from the environment. And plastic producers also put chemicals there, like plasticizers, stabilizers. These are all toxic. So even the plastics themselves, the very raw material, is not toxic. They eventually get toxic. I'm going to talk more about that. Yeah, this brings us actually to microplastics. These are particles 5 millimeter in size or less. Even nanoparticles of plastics exist, okay? And the smaller they get, actually, the more dangerous they get. So what you see is not the worst here. What you don't see is actually the dangerous stuff. Now, microplastics can be primary. They're actually in your toothpaste, and it's actually put intentionally there as an abrasive. Like when I was a child in 1970s, 80s, I remember they used to put paws or clay, which was more like ceramic-like abrasives. Today they were actually started putting polyethylene in there. And some dentists actually complain about this because when their patients visit their offices, they see particles of plastic in between their teeth. But for the environment, the worst thing is you spit the toothpaste in the sink, it goes to your underground system or rivers. Eventually, the water comes to water filtration treatment station. They cannot filter out this. It goes to your tap water and you drink it, okay? So to me, this is a very stupid way of creating microplastics in the environment. Something like this can be prevented very easily, actually. When I was at Penn State, a friend of mine was actually working on the frogs in the rivers. And guess what she found? She found significant levels of Prozac in the frogs. And when I was at Penn State, there was a radio station there, like a country music station called Froggy 98 or something. And I said, figure out, oh, this is why frogs must be happy there, you know, because of the Prozac. Now, the secondary type of microplastic pollution is more serious. This is the debris of our waste. So as I told you, it may take 1,000 years for a plastic bag or plastic bottle to grind eventually down to small particles, okay? And those particles are actually very dangerous because small animals like planktons can actually ingest them. And fish actually eat this, and eventually we eat them. We are at the top of the food chain, so eventually we are impacted too. Finally, microplastics are also produced in your tires, like you actually friction of your textiles, you know, fabrics. They also create microplastics. But the worst one is actually the secondary one, which is basically created by the debris in the oceans and in the land. Now it's in the air, in the Arctic ice. Now what's the solution? Well, the easiest thing to say is decrease the plastic use. Yeah, we can do it, but will the whole world do it? You know, that's the question. Actually, authorities say in this science paper, they say the decrease in the plastic use won't happen until 2100. So for almost another 180 years, I think the plastic consumption and waste will increase on this planet. Hopefully it's not going to happen, but that's the prediction. Because it's an economic, it has an economic side too. And yet Africa hasn't started using much plastics. Think about like in 30 years, some other third world countries starting tons of plastics. So hopefully this is wrong news, but it's just a prediction. Now, recycling is a good solution, but as I told you, only 9% is recycled because recycling today is more expensive than making these polymers from scratch. Because once the polymers are used, they also get contaminated and they have to wash and they have to be separated. That costs more than actually just making them from brand new, you know, from scratch. Now, a third approach would be designing greener plastics, which actually degrade faster in the environment. And this is really what enters my expertise and interest, because I'm not an environmental engineer. I'm a material scientist, so I actually think, I mean, this is what actually attracts me, making new generation, inventing new generation of plastics, which will actually degrade faster in the environment. Now, okay, what are plastics? So these folks all took the material science course here. Did you guys take all material science? Okay, so they know what plastics are, but let me go over this really quickly. Plastics are long chains of molecular chains of carbon. Here, these black beads represent carbon. The white beads actually represent hydrogen. This is the simplest and most common plastic, polyethylene. Okay, this is your grocery bag. This is your grocery bag, and many other things made from polyethylene. Now, the second most popular polymer, polypropylene. Do you know where this was discovered? Bartlesville, Oklahoma. Phillips made this. Today, this is the second most popular plastic. Actually, the Phillips engineers, they were trying to make gasoline from propylene. And then they just discovered polypropylene. Now, the question now is, oh, these look really strong materials, you know, this carbon-carbon bond. Carbon-carbon bond is one of the most strongest bond in the universe. Actually, it's the strongest bond in the universe. How come plastics are actually soft? Well, this molecular chains actually entangle in a bulk plastic, and they look like a bowl of spaghetti. So when you actually stretch a grocery bag, you are actually sliding those worms, sliding those chains against each other. But you're not actually really breaking those carbon-carbon bonds. Those carbon-carbon bonds are still intact. So that's why actually plastics don't degrade easily in the planet, you know? They're almost for forever. Now, okay, I was gonna make it a quiz question. So who is cleaning our mess eventually? Yes, somebody is cleaning this plastic mess on this planet, but it's a slow process. And that's why plastics are accumulating more and more. But what do you think? Who is actually cleaning this mess? Bacteria and fungi also. So microorganisms actually they clean after us. Now, this is a very simple animation. They have extracellular enzymes which go stick on plastics, okay, and then basically they cleave those carbon-carbon bonds, and they transform the plastics to oligomers, the polymers to oligomers, or just monomers, and then the intracellular enzymes just basically convert that smaller size bytes into actually energy, because they treat them just like carbohydrates, it's like they are eating bagels, okay? So the product is carbon dioxide, hydrogen, water, and sometimes in unaerated conditions, they also make methane out of this. So these are really good guys, but the problem is they are doing their job very slowly. You know, we are putting 8 million cubic tons of plastic in the ocean every year. I think nobody can really cope with that. Scientists already identified some of these bacteria and fungi, okay? And every year some new ones are discovered. Like a couple of years ago, some Japanese scientists, they actually located some water bottles in the ocean, staying there for a long time. And for instance, they isolated one of those bacteria. These cigar-shaped, actually, microorganisms is this new bacteria discovered a couple of years ago. They put them on they grew them and they put them on a plastic surface. Actually, it was a PET. They isolated this from a PET bottle, and then in 60 days, they did a pretty good job. I mean, these bacteria are definitely eating plastics. Now, actually, this was Lynch's idea to make this bacteria speak like that. So I told you the main problem is actually these polymer chains are too long. They are repetition of typically hundreds of thousands or millions of mers. And they have to be cleaved. They have to be chopped to the right bite size. Okay, that happens, but that's a slow process. Secondly, most of our plastic waste is polyolefins. These are hydrophobic polymer chains, and usually in life, things are favored in the direction of hydrophilic. So something actually has to make this polar, hopefully by actually oxidation. So Lynch's bacteria is not just talented, it's speaking two different languages here, I guess. So is there a process like this, which chops the chains, polymer chains, as well as makes them polar. So they are soluble in water, they are easy to enter the living organisms. Actually, there is one, and it's photodegradation. It's photooxidation. So this is actually what I am trying to do, and my students, past student, Siri Harsha Karumiri did in his thesis, and now Lynchy is actually doing a similar research. Now, what is photodegradation? I think we are all familiar with newspapers and papers going yellow like this, and there are more examples like old computer mouses and headlight, covers like that go yellow. So this is only one of the 4 steps in photodegradation, which is photooxidation. There are other processes like dissociation, cross-linking, and chain scission, okay? So photooxidation is one of them. Now, a little bit chemistry here. Since this is Science Cafe, let's a little bit talk about chemistry. These are actually represent 2 atoms with 1 electron in their atomic orbitals. Now, how molecules really are created? They come together, and these atomic orbitals make molecular orbitals. So electrons are lazy. They occupy the lower level, which is the antibonding orbital. We call this in chemistry sigma orbitals or pi orbitals. But for each bonding orbital, we also create an antibonding orbital. Here is my photon. Maybe this is a UV photon, ultraviolet photon, and makes one of those electrons go to the upper level. Okay, this is called an optical transition. This is how polymers also absorb, plastics hopefully absorb the sunlight, okay? Now I created the energetic molecule there, an excited molecule. Actually, that excited molecule probably lives about a nanosecond. But if it is lucky in that nanosecond, that bond can be cleaved, and the molecule will create something called a radical. It means a molecule with a broken bond, with unpaired electrons. And that radical is very active. So a second type of reaction can happen, like the energy of the excited molecule can be transferred to water or oxygen in the environment, and it will create reactive oxygen species. Now, in photochemistry, both of these reactive species can do things. They result in chemical reactions. So this is photochemistry. Now, for about 70 years, people have believed polymers actually degrade with this mechanism here by radical formation. But in our group, what we found was an alternative and more likely way polymers are actually photodegrading is by this pathway here. Okay, and that's what our research was about. Now, auto-oxidation theory, this has been acknowledged for the last 70 years. Photons come, they create radicals. Those radicals react with oxygen molecules, make peroxides and new radicals, and then they again react with oxygen, make new radicals, peroxides, new radicals, peroxides. So this is a radical chain reaction. But just like in 2011, this theory was seriously challenged by a young scientist from Australia. And he showed by quantum calculations, quantum chemistry calculations, this radical formation propagation is not actually self-driven. It's not downhill energy. It's actually going up in energy. And it only explains rubber photodegradation, but it doesn't really explain how polystyrene degrades, photodegrades. By the way, polystyrene is our coffee cup, so Science Cafe, we have polystyrene, okay? Now, the real question is, can sunlight really, excite these molecules in the polymer? If you look at the sigma-sigma transitions, or pi-pi transitions, these are the common bonds in a polymer. sunlight cannot really break these bonds because sunlight, thanks to the ozone layer, is only the lowest part of the UV radiation, which we call UVA. There is also UVB, there's UVC, these are higher UV radiation ranges, and they are not in the sun we are receiving. It's not the spectrum reaching the Earth, okay? So it seems like solar light cannot really directly break the molecular bonds in a polymer. So, I mean, these are carbon-carbon bonds or carbon-hydrogen bonds that I'm actually talking about. But then, okay, we said, you know, 5-6 years ago with my PhD student, Siri Harsha, we said, okay, what we're gonna do, I mean, we have to first understand photodegradation, you know, how it happens. There's not really a very consistent theory out there. And we said, okay, let's first analyze this yellowing thing. Because if plastics go yellow, they have to be absorbing some light. And maybe this, whatever in that yellow plastic is gonna actually enable further oxidation because it's absorbing the solar light. Okay, now, let me ask you, how do you create, this is not really yellow, this is actually light brown or yellowish brown. Let me ask you a question, how do you create brown color? Did you do any watercolors at home? Almost all primary colors, exactly, except for one of them. Blue. If you subtract blue color from white light, you actually get yellow color like this, or light brown. So, well, this shows it's actually there's absorption in the blue color. But no, we are not the first people who knows this. This is known. There are groups called carbonyls, like C double bond O. These groups actually can extract blue color as well as UVA from the solar light. So we said, okay, maybe these carbonyls are not only the product of photodegradation, they could be the engine of the photodegradation. So they are not just products, but they also enable photodegradation because they are really the only absorbers of the light here, you know? So how carbonyls, you know, I'm talking about these CO groups here, C double bond O groups, they have lone pairs on the oxygen. And electrons can actually make transitions from those lone pair orbitals, which we call n orbitals, to the pi star, antibonding pi orbitals. So these are actually what creates your yellow color. But in addition to that yellow color, they also are actually very active absorbing the UVA light, which we don't see by our eyes, but it's actually there. Now, the carbonyls also do some other magic. Now, when we actually excite a carbonyl molecule like this, that excited electron can stay there a really long amount of time. I'm talking about microseconds, but microseconds in chemistry is a long, long time. So it actually gives the molecule enough chance for that electron to twist its spin. So you see now in the molecule, we have same spin in the same direction. Let me see, I think in my presentation yesterday, I forgot to rotate that spin, okay? So, excuse me. So I just realized this, you know? So basically, this spin will rotate, okay? So now I actually created a molecule which is called a triplet. The problem with this molecule is now this electron will stay there for such a long time because you know from chemistry, I cannot put the same spin on the same orbital. It's against exclusion principle, right? So something faster happens still. That electron gets channeled to an oxygen molecule and excites it. It makes it and activated oxygen. Now let me ask you, what percentage of air is oxygen? Anybody knows? 21, that's good. So it is actually a pretty significant number. And interestingly though, that 20 or 21% oxygen doesn't burn us. And thanks God, it doesn't burn us because oxygen is actually a triplet molecule, which means its highest energy electrons are actually showing in the same spin. Okay, and we are all singlets, which means our electrons are all paired in terms of spin, so we don't have net spin in our bodies. So oxygen doesn't want to attack us. However, if we excite the oxygen molecule and make one of those spins upside down or twisted, that oxygen molecule will be activated. And indeed, this is how, when you get sick, your white blood cells, they produce activated oxygen, and that's how they actually eat or destroy the infected cells. Or when the leaves turn in the fall, you know, we enjoy turning leaves, it's actually action of singlet oxygen. So singlet oxygen or active oxygen is pretty important in the nature. And even today, there are some cancer therapies using active singlet oxygen. But anyways, here, this means a carbonyl group can absorb the UVA light, and it can transfer the energy to oxygen and make that oxygen active, and now that oxygen can attack the polymer. So a process like this is called autocatalytic because carbonyls now can make new carbonyls. You know, they can generate new carbonyls. So the photodegradation can actually increase and increase and increase. So that was a hypothesis. You know, we are not the first group who claimed carbonyls absorb UVA. We are not the first group who claimed, oh, yellowing is due to carbonyls. But what we claimed was carbonyls actually are producers of singlet oxygen, which actually then provide photodegradation of the polymer. That was our hypothesis. So to test this hypothesis, we made thin films of epoxy as well as polystyrene. Basically, we were putting the liquid precursor and spinning on a slide and making thin films like 600 nanometers, 700 nanometers thick. And then we were actually putting the samples under UVA light and checking how the optical absorption was actually changing. Now, this yellow region is the visible region. And you see there is some increase, a little bit increase in that region. That's the yellowing of the polymer. But if you look at the whole UVA regime, we see significant increase in the carbonyl density. Now, this is actually, you see a major band here. This major band is intrinsic to the polymer, but it's not really much excited by the UV light, okay? But the carbonyls do, okay? So, I mean, there are different, this was actually epoxy, and there are different sites which can be oxidized by oxygen. So these blue little buttons will actually turn to all carbonyls. And they have different carbonyl bands. You see it peak at 340, peak at 397, 284, 276. So bunch of carbonyls. I mean, by the way, this spectrum is a different spectrum. This spectrum shows what change is happening there. And significant change is really happening. But what we were actually claiming is the way that change is happening is due to the carbonyls. Okay, so what we did was, okay, we integrated the area under that curve to quantify the amount of carbonyls. So by time, this is the kinetics we derived for photodegradation. This is the carbonyl density as a function of time. And you see here actually, you see some sigmoidal behavior, which is actually a curve in the form of an S. That means it first gets faster, and eventually it saturates. It's just like bacterial growth. So bacteria, you know, is producing themselves, but eventually they saturate because the food source is limited. Here, eventually the system gets, you know, to a maximum because all oxidation sites are depleted, you know, then it actually goes down. The carbonyl density is actually decreasing. That's because carbonyls now are dissociating, okay? So, you know, this was still at a very hypothetical explanation. We see three different regimes there. The first regime is the autocatalytic fast regime, where carbonyls are producing carbonyls. In the second regime, the thing is getting slowed down because oxidation sites are all depleted. And finally, carbonyls actually transform to carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, water. You know, that's the dissociation regime. Now, we put all this into actually the same thing is seen for polystyrene. For polystyrene, actually, Lynchy got this data. You know, we see the same sigmoidal behavior more pronounced. We see actually more nonlinear response in the beginning, which actually says, yeah, carbonyls are producing other carbonyls. Now, we also, you know, corroborated the same with infrared spectroscopy. As the CH bonds are decaying, we see the carbonyls are coming up. And then eventually carbonyls are also getting weaker. But, you know, the actually real, let me put everything into an animation as a cartoon here, what I ever said. This is the carbonyl. It gets excited by the sunlight. Now, it may either relax back to its previous case or, you know, by fluorescence or heat production, but it can also actually transfer the energy to active oxygen and make, oxygen and make active oxygen. Then that active oxygen reacts with CH2 sites and degrades the polymer. You know, so this was actually the basic model we hypothesized. And the carbonyls, if they don't do this and if they don't do that, they can also actually dissociate to carbon dioxide, monoxide, and that's really, you know, evaporation of the volatilization of the polymer. So this was our actual model, and what needed to be done is just prove this, validate this. So what we did was, we put this picture, this model, I'm going the other way around, into mathematical equations. So we came up with 4 coupled differential equations. And if you really solve number 1 and number 2, you can solve the other 2. And, you know, we got a pretty good agreement with the experimental data. And in this solution, we only have 2 rate constants. You know, it's not really fitting. The equations were pretty ab initio. So we also did actually 12 different experiments to really prove this model. We sent samples to Houston, University of Houston. And we really saw singlet oxygen generation in these films. We get, you know, evidence that singlet oxygen is really generated in these thin films we made. So a lot of things were actually, you know, supporting our model. Now, these simulations also gave some insight to us. This graph tells us the depth time profile of the carbonyl density. So if we look at the top, we are looking at top of the film. That's where actually gets the sunlight directly. So there we see in the beginning the carbonyl density is almost 0, but as time goes, at 5 hours, we see some significant generation of carbonyls. And they maximize, and then they actually fade. So in 20 hours, that very first layer of the polymer is gone, okay? If we look at somewhere deeper, the things actually happen slower because the top layer is shadowing the solar light. So basically, though, eventually, the solar light comes to the deeper layers too. The way it happens is, first the top layer is just gone, and then the second layer gets actual solar light, then it's gone, and the third layer later and later. And if you look at this maximum carbonyl density, it actually linearly goes in the depth of the film. So this model was also explaining how photodegradation was actually happening through the depth of the film or through the depth of the plastic, which was not really known before, I guess. So coming back to the environmental problem, I think I have a few more slides left. Can we come up with something to replace those carbonyls? Because carbonyls are good, they are great, but eventually they dissociate. And we have to wait for them to be generated for photodegradation to be really fast. Instead, can we put something there instead of a carbonyl, which will actually start this photodegradation at a really high level, okay? And of course, we tried some molecules, but molecules photodegrade too, Then we said, okay, let's try these guys. This molecule is 60 carbon atoms put together in the shape of a soccer ball. I was going to ask you, what kind of ball is this? I mean, I think everybody knows this. It's a dumb quiz question. I think everybody knows this is a soccer ball. This molecule won the Nobel Prize in 1996, and the discoverer of this molecule was one of them was Richard Smalley. He said, this is the most beautiful molecule in the universe, and the truth is, this is the most symmetric molecule in the universe. And guess what? It makes a lot of singlet oxygens. You put this under solar light, it makes activated oxygen at a quantum yield of almost 100%. Okay, so we said, let's put this in our plastics, and this red curve is without the Bocce Balls, but C60 molecules, but look at that green one. It's only 3% Bocce Ball, and the photodegradation is actually much faster. Actually, photodegradation even started during the making of this film, okay? But if you look at the 5% Bocce Ball density, we see a decrease in the rate, because when Bocce Balls come together, they try to de-excite themselves, which is called triplet annihilation. So the Bocce Balls were actually something to prove this model. But we don't like the Bocce Balls because, first of all, you cannot put a lot of them there. Secondly, Bocce Balls are carbon-based. They can be toxic. And finally, as Lynch found recently, Bocce Balls also degrade under solar light, which we never expected that. But apparently, they also degrade under solar light. And we have a different model for that. Anyways, so our solution is, our research is in the direction of finding new nanoparticles, environmental nanoparticles, which can actually generate singlet oxygen under solar light and accelerate the photodegradation of polymers so they can help this bacteria, our friends in the nature, so the bacteria can chew these plastics faster. Now, these are some engineering approaches how to increase photodegradation, and I told you our current research is about, really discovering new oxygen sensitizers, single oxygen sensitizers. This is a little bit proprietary now because, we are still working on this. We have some good candidates of nanoparticles which are doing the job, but we keep it a little bit secret now. Now, let me finish this with some concluding remarks. Now, we always think we are optimistic about life. It is a great thing. But we are also thinking always we are lucky, right? So maybe some of us will never think this plastic waste thing is going to impact on our lives. But are we really lucky? I mean, if you look at the last 20, 30 years, we lost the honeybees, right? I just see wasps around, but I don't really see the honeybees. And we know the reason, right? Secondly, we lost 40% of the coral reef in the world. We almost lost the whole Colorado River, right? We don't have the seasons like we used to have 50 years ago. So are we really lucky? So, I mean, that's just a question for you. I think we can still feel optimistic about life, but we cannot neglect the problems. That's what I think. Now, I showed you some pictures of seals, whales, seabirds, which really suffered because of plastic waste, right? Plastic pollution. But I think we are the species on this planet who should suffer the most. The reason is we are really the dinosaurs of this age. We are at the top of the food chain. So if some tragedy happens, I think it will hit the people first. But our advantage is we have science, right? We are not dinosaurs. Our brains are actually developed. So we have to use science to solve problems. And my final message is, you know, sometimes environmental protection and economy, they conflict. It's a political thing, I know. But in the long run, environmental protection actually can create lots of jobs. It can really empower the economy. Because if you lose the environment, economy doesn't make any sense anyway. I mean, economy is about utilizing the resources, right? Where does those resources come from? The resources come from the planet, from the environment. But anyway, my message is, those two things are not necessarily conflicting. You know, I think the environmental protection technologies in the future can create lots of new jobs and strengthen the economy. So finally, I want to acknowledge my students. Much of this work was actually done by Siri Harsha. He's now in Intel Corporation, and he's dealing with different types of polymers for microfabrication. So he's actually investigating the effect of plasmas and photochemistry in photoresist in Intel. Lynchy is now sort of continuing this research, and Özge also helped us a lot. I thank Dr. Jiming Bao in the University of Houston because he kindly did this Singlet Oxygen measurements, and I actually thank President Hargis for giving some support on this and also some funding agency. And eventually I survived. Thank you for your attention. I know it's a hot day and lots of your friends are enjoying the hot weather, I guess. But you just came here, so I really thank you. And I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Does anyone have a question? Yes.
So a lot of this is just graduate research. So it's probably, is this part of the graduate research program?
That's true. A lot of this is done by one of my PhD students. That's correct. But if you're interested, are you an undergrad? You're an undergrad. Yeah, you're welcome to join us. Yes. I think the question is, if we incinerate plastics, if we burn them, what are the health hazards, right? Yeah, the problem is, you know, when you burn plastics, you do a lot of incomplete combustion. That means oxygen doesn't go there very efficiently. So what you create is amorphous carbon nanoparticles. Basically, it's soot. So you are creating a lot of soot there because of incomplete combustion. And then soot is not good for your lungs, because once you inhale soot, you know, my grandfather was a coal miner. He was actually an engineer. But I know typical coal miners were used to live like 40 years because all this coal deposit in their lungs was causing cancer in early ages. So the problem is it may cause issues like lung cancer. Now, if you do that at home, maybe it's not going to impact you directly because the soot will go out, right? As long as you don't inhale it, it's not that bad. But in the long run, if everybody does that, the atmosphere in the planet will get contaminated with soot particles. And soot particles are carcinogenic. So that will be my guess. But in the future, there may be systems which burn this plastic more efficiently without creating soot particles. Then I think that will be a healthier choice. But right now, if you just burn plastic, just like you are burning wood at home, that's actually pretty dangerous. That's what I would say. Is that a good answer for you? Actually, yeah, there are also some other chemicals in the plastics which may be also like if you burn PVC, polyvinyl chloride, oh my God, that's the worst thing to do. You can get actually intoxicated because it will radiate a lot of chlorine gas. You know, never burn PVC. I know people died because of PVC burning, you know. But there might be other toxic chemicals which are also coming out. But even if you burn pure polyethylene, polypropylene, it's not a good idea because you're going to create a lot of soot. And that's going to actually pollute the air. And it's going to pollute your lungs.
Okay, thank you again.
Thank you.